Knowing how to properly use your gear makes all the difference and is key when it comes to getting the most out of it. Using the wrong settings can ruin your footage, while understanding the how behind your settings can make shooting so much easier and also gives you the best results. Your goal should be to focus on the scenes and framing instead of dealing with your camera settings, because this is what filmmaking is all about. Catching feelings and moments in order to tell stories that evoke the emotions of the viewer. I constantly get the question what settings I use for my videos. And looking back, this is exactly what I wanted to know when I first started out as well. But now that I figured it out, it isn't even a thing that I think about when I take videos. So let's help you to set up your camera to get the best possible footage out of it. When you take a look at your camera, you can see that you have the option to shoot in different modes. I personally always shoot in manual mode, so my dial was always locked at M in order to have 100% control over my settings, which is what we are looking for. But one thing that sucks is when you want to switch back to taking photos and you have to change every single setting again. But here comes a really handy thing which saves you a ton of time and makes it possible to switch from photo to video in just one click, and it is super easy. The A6500, the A7II, A7III and most newer Sony cameras got the opportunity 1 and 2 on the dial, which can be customized with all your basic settings that you need. And the best thing is, even if you're playing around and change these settings, once you switch back to manual and again to your customized 1 or 2, it remembers the settings that you have set it up in the first place. Which means we can go through all the settings step by step together, and you can always get back to these settings and start filming. To do so, you have to switch your dial to manual now and follow along this video and change all the settings, and in the end you can select either memory spot 1 or 2, and then you have the settings saved. But don't worry, I will get back to this and show you how to do this. So let's start. The file format and record setting doesn't seem to be that important, but they definitely are. To keep it short, the A7 III can record in 4K with 25 FPS and in 1080p with up to 50 or 100 FPS. The difference is that 50 and 100 FPS gives you the opportunity to slow down your footage in the post-production. If you don't want to use slow motion, you want to select 25 FPS because this gives you the most cinematic look. If you're interested in which frame rates I shoot my travel videos in, make sure to check out this video here. I recommend you to set up one memory slot of your dial with 25 FPS and one with 100 FPS. This is how you can change from 25 to 100 FPS with just one click and also go back to manual, and then you have all your photography settings. So this is by far the fastest workflow that I ever used on my Sony A7 III so far. But for now we are going through all the settings for 25 FPS to set up our memory slot 1. So make sure to go to the menu on the first page of the second folder and select XAVCS 4K as your file format and 25p 100M as your record settings. 60M would give you a smaller file size but also less information in the video. Now we're taking care of the basic settings to get the right exposure. ISO, aperture and shutter speed. These are the only 3 settings that control your exposure and should always be the same to get the most cinematic look. In most of the situations I keep the f-stop as low as possible to get a nice blurry background and depth of field. It also makes it possible to play with some focus poles. With my main lens, the Tamron 28 to 75mm f2.8 is what I'm going for. To adjust your f-stop, use your wheel on the front side under your shutter button. When it comes to the shutter speed, you should always double your frame rate, which is also called the 180-degree rule. This means for 25 FPS, your shutter speed should be 1/50. The shutter angle affects your footage in the way the motion blur is recorded. With the 180 rule, you will get the most natural motion blur, and it is definitely fine for the beginning. To adjust your shutter speed, use the wheel on the back side of your camera. If you want to dive deeper into this topic, I will link you a video down below in the description from Mark Bone, who explained this in depth. And he also talked about the differences and effects that you have in your video when you use your shutter speed to adjust your exposure. My ISO is most of the time at 800 because this is the native ISO from the picture profile that I shoot in. which is S-Log2. And believe me when I tell you that this is the easiest way to get a clean and natural look in your video, but I will come to this later. I only pump up my ISO when I don't have enough light, but I want to make sure to not go too high as the image gets pretty noisy. Once you have set it up your ISO, aperture and shutter speed, your image probably looks something like this in a daylight situation, so pretty overexposed. And to fix this, there is where a variable ND filter comes in. A VND helps you to easily expose your image correctly with the spin of the filter. This means your setting remains the same and you only have to adjust the strength of the VND to expose your image. If you are new to videography, I can recommend you to get a cheap variable ND filter, and I will link you one for 30 euros down below in the description. And then you can figure out if you will stick to the creative path with video. And I can highly recommend it because it's just awesome. But if you are already more advanced, make sure to take some more money in your hand, because in this way you don't get weird color shifts or something, and it is an investment in the future and it definitely makes sense. I just received the magnetic VND filter system by Freewell and will test this in depth and let you know my thoughts soon. I already want to thank Freewell Gear for sending this out to me. Now you already know a lot about the basics and that the settings are more or less always the same. But before we talk about the picture profile, let's dive into white balance and autofocus. I used to shoot with my white balance in automatic mode, but then I had some weird color shifts, so from the white balance in a single shot, and that really sucks. So I started to shoot with manual white balance, and it is super easy and I can highly recommend it to you. To enable the manual white balance, you have to jump in your quick menu and select the white balance. Once it is selected, you have to go all the way down until you see the letter K, which stands for Kelvin. Hit right on your back dial and then you can select the Kelvin that you need. For almost every daylight situation, I set my Kelvin to 5600 and only adjust this when I need to. To adjust the Kelvin, just go up and down and see what looks most natural to you. The autofocus from the Sony A7 III is already really good and reliable, but if you're shooting on the A7 II or any older Sony cameras, you probably want to watch the video that I made about using autofocus here. But for the A7 III, you can just go to the menu folder 2 on page 2 and copy these settings. I never switch these, and my basic settings are also the continuous autofocus, which is AFC, and the wide focus area. In particular situations, it definitely makes sense to switch your autofocus settings, and I have recently watched a really good video about that from Jack Carford, and will link you this video in the description down below. And if you check out this video, also make sure to check out his channel and watch some more videos, because he is an amazing filmmaker and shares a lot of value. I already mentioned that I use S-Log2 as my favorite color profile, and I know that a lot of people say that S-Log in general is a pain in the ass when it comes to exposing and also color grading with 8-bit cameras. I've really heard that a lot, and because of that I never really tried it hard enough. But now, after I know what I have to do, it is by far the most easy picture profile to get a clean and natural look. When you check your camera picture profile, PP7 should be S-Log2, at least that's on my A7 III the case. And I have only changed the color mode to S-3.Cine because I got the best results after testing some different modes. To make the exposing easier, you can use Zebra and Gamma Assist. Or if you're shooting with a monitor, you can use also false color, which is by far the easiest way to expose S-Log. If you don't know what this is or how to use it, make sure to stay tuned for my next week's video, because I'm going to show you this in depth. But here's already how you can set it up. To turn on zebras on your camera, go to the menu folder 2 on page 6 and select Zebra. Here you can turn on Display Zebra and also select a level. For most of the situations, I recommend you to select 95 IRE. The Gamma Assist can be selected in folder 5 on page 1. For our picture profile, use S-Log2 to look at some colors on your display instead of a flat image. Sadly, this setting is not considered in the memory slot, so I recommend you to put this on a custom button so that you can turn it on and off quickly. Last but not least, you should adjust your aspect ratio, as this is considered in the memory slot as well. To set the right framing for your video, select the 16:9 aspect ratio in folder 1 on page 1. And this is how I set up my camera for every shooting that I have. But as I mentioned at the beginning, you don't have to switch all of these settings again and again when you're moving from photo to video, because we have the memory slot doing this for us. And believe me when I tell you that this saves you a lot of time and headache when you just can't switch your dial to 1 or either 2 and you have all the settings that you need. And sadly, I missed a lot of photos because I didn't knew about this feature earlier, and I was in my video mode in the manual dial, and I didn't want to switch all of these settings just to take one shot. And I just found out about this feature a week ago, so thank me later. If you followed along, you already have the best video settings in your manual dial. Now to save them to your memory slot 1, you just have to go into your menu folder 1 on page 3 and select memory. Then you will get an overview and can choose between 1 and 2. For now, stay in 1 and hit enter. And easy as that, you got your video settings every time you switch your dial to 1. As I mentioned before, I recommend you to set up your memory slot 2 to 100 FPS. And to do so, you only have to change 3 settings. Let me show you. First off, you need to change your file format to XAVCS HD and your record settings to 100 FPS. If you remember the 180-degree rule from the beginning, you can do the math and know that you have to change your shutter speed to 1/200. And there you go. Now you just have to select memory slot 2 in your menu and register all of these settings. And this is how you can easily switch between photo, video with 25 and slow motion video with 100 FPS by just a switch of a dial. Pretty easy, huh? And if you're interested in how to expose your image correct and also how to color grade this easy natural look, make sure to subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for next week's video, because I'm going to share a lot of information about that. And if you did it, I'll see you guys next week. Have a good one.